This is a little bit of memoir about my slightly strange bohemian family and my later discovery of my Romany roots. It's called My Mother Said. My mother said I never should play with the gypsies in the wood. If I did, she would say, naughty girl, to disobey. Being outsiders in a rural community was a challenge, but my parents rose to it well. I was very young when we moved with my paternal grandmother, Kit, who was suffering from early stage dementia, from Brighton to Kingsdown, a remote Tudor farmhouse in East Sussex. Normally my encounters with Kit were brief and argumentative. For some reason I gained an odd pleasure from taking the contrary view to hers. We'd had one of our little exchanges recently while watching Hattie Jacques and Eric Sykes on the television. She doesn't get any thinner, does she? Kit said, referring to Hattie. Yes, she does, I replied. I could see my mother trying not to laugh as she threw me a half-scolded stare. Isn't it her bedtime yet? Said Kit, annoyingly. I thought if I kept a low enough profile, everyone would forget about bedtime and I would get to stay up with the grown-ups and watch telly. As a sure way of getting a rise out of Kit was to lie on the sofa that run along the back of the sitting room, walking my feet up and down the wattle and daub plaster between the dark oak beams while hanging my head off the sofa. I liked the feeling of the cool, lumpy wall beneath my feet. It wouldn't take long for Kit to notice and we would have our usual exchange. I really don't think you should have your feet on the wall. Why not? Because you'll knock down the plaster and make it dirty with marks with your feet. No, I won't. My debating skills were not yet honed, so this was the best I could come up with. After a few more rounds of this circular argument, I would remove my feet, and then when Kit was settled, I would put them up again. I remember my early childhood as a happy time running wild about the farm, the surrounding fields and woods. Totally tomboy, I dressed in shorts and t-shirts in warm weather, and jeans, jumpers and Wellington boots in colder, wetter days. Apart from school uniforms, skirts and dresses were not part of my wardrobe. The children's song My Mother Said gives some sense of the attitudes of the time, although the complete opposite was true of my mother, as she would have actively encouraged me playing in the woods with gypsies had the opportunity arisen. She championed outsiders and misfits and was forever filling the house with the human equivalent of stray dogs. One such person, Marty Cairncross-Lee, was from a gypsy family, and being a known rascal attracted the attention of police whenever there was a local misdemeanour. At one point, Marty found himself homeless with his wife, Sybil, 8 months pregnant. Mum took them in. It was only a few days later at 6 a.m. that the police raided our house looking for Marty. They stormed in on him and Sybil as they slept in the embered bedroom of our old farmhouse. I ran from my room next door, which I shared with my brother Simon, to see what the commotion was, just as Mum rounded on Dave Carter, the local bobby. With a flick of her head, the deep auburn fringe that covered her right eye flew back, allowing both pale blue eyes to fix on the now nervous-looking policeman. Jesus Christ, Dave! Did you have to bring the heavy mob? Could you not have telephoned or come at a decent hour? Dave Carter looked a bit out of depth and muttered, They said he'd do a runner if he was tipped off. Bloody hell, Dave! He's not Al Capone. We'll see about this. I knew that tone well, and it meant he was definitely in trouble. Don't you go anywhere till I get dressed. With that, she turned and left the room. I noticed she was wearing Dad's favourite paisley patterned silk dressing gown and a pair of Wellington boots. Simon had now joined me in the doorway, and as Mum stomped past, we looked at each other and then back into the room as Sybil, who was sitting on the edge of the bed in her floral nightie, cried out in a shrill voice, It started, Marty, it started! And then PC Carter, she wailed, You brought on the baby, that's what you've done. Marty was cursing as the police, having told him to get some clothes on, manhandled him out of the room. Get your filthy hands off me, you fucking pigs! It's a bloody stitch-up. Can't you think of anyone else to arrest? Marty's voice trailed behind him as he disappeared down the small back staircase in the corner of the room. Dave Carter seemed to hesitate before following, no doubt worried he would feel more of my mother's wrath for not doing what he'd asked. Me? Well, I found it all very exciting and wondered if the drama meant a day off school. Elements of what happened in our house with Marty would later be played out at my village school, when some Romany children whose family had camped locally were enrolled there for a short time. Tyso and his kin were the only encounter I'd had with anyone from a different racial background apart from Marty and Sybil. Our small farming community seemed to be entirely white, though I was aware from the television that this wasn't the case elsewhere in the world, because TV newscasters talked of a place called Rhodesia, where a white man called Ian Smith, who spoke in a very odd accent, constantly talked about coloured people. I imagined them to be red, blue and green. Failing to make the connection with the comments about me, she's got a touch of the tar brush, hasn't she? I suppose that being likened to a tar brush was one up from being called a loo brush, because at least the tar brush wouldn't be stuck down the lavatory. My parents had told me the nurses at Brighton Hospital had joked that I looked like a loo brush because of my massive black hair.